Hello and welcome to the Spinal Cord Injury Forum. My name is Jeannie Hoffman and I'm a clinical psychologist here at the Department of Rehabilitation Medicine and also the director of the Northwest Regional Spinal Cord Injury System. Tonight we're really pleased to welcome three local activists. We have Conrad Reynolds, Kenny Savini, and Bruce Hansen. And tonight we're going to have them really talk about three different projects, advocacy projects that they've gotten involved with. One at a local level, kind of county level, one at the state level, and another at the national level. And really thinking about kind of how do people get into this. We have the range from somebody who works in disability law, somebody who's been a longtime advocate, and somebody who kind of fell into advocacy just based on kind of lived experience. And so we'll get a little bit more information from them. So welcome, you guys. I wanted to start and just, maybe we'll start, Conrad, with you since you had the more local kind of advocacy project. So if you could do just a brief introduction of yourself and then tell us a little bit about kind of the project, how that came about, and the little bit of details about it.
Sounds great, thank you. So I'm Conrad Reynolds. I'm an attorney with the nonprofit law firm Washington Civil and Disability Advocate. And we've been a 501c3 nonprofit for about 3 years now. And before I actually formed that law firm, my very first case out of law school was a class action called Reynolds v. City of Seattle, where I was the named plaintiff in a class action lawsuit dealing with curb ramp accessibility in the city of Seattle. And so, first off, the very high-level overview of that, it really had to do with the fact that there were missing curb ramps, improperly constructed curb ramps, and curb ramps that were basically at a 90-degree angle. And what I mean by that is that they would put it in the middle, and then you would have to go left or right into the street to cross the street. And so I think first off, I'll just summarize kind of what the legal claims were going into it. And so first off, there were curb ramps that should have been installed pursuant to new construction, alterations, or programmatic access requirements. And so I'll go into what that means. So new construction alteration requirements. Since 1977 and 1992, the Rehab Act and Title II of the ADA have covered that. And they've required that newly constructed or altered streets, roads, and highways contain curb ramps and are fully accessible. And the leading case on that was actually in 1993 called Kinney v. Jerusalem. And there they said that ADA regulations effectively unify a street and its curbs as interdependent facilities. If a street is altered to make it more usable to the general public, it must also be made more usable to people with disabilities. So unfortunately, notwithstanding those requirements, Seattle's policies until at least 2011 required the installation of curb ramps where alterations occurred only close to the curb. And so they're missing a lot of things that way. And so then the next thing to touch on is that curb ramps are required by the programmatic access requirement, which is a key requirement in the ADA. And that basically says that each program or service provided by a public entity like the City of Seattle has to be readily accessible and usable to people with disabilities. And a service program or activity is anything a public entity does. So obviously sidewalks and the right-of-way are a key thing with that. And then another requirement also is that people with disabilities should not be required to travel longer routes to get to where they're going to access city facilities and public accommodations. And that, going into this, our position was that they needed to build more curb ramps so that when the system, when viewed in its entirety, is readily accessible. And initially, when we started that case, the city's estimate was that there would be something like 4,000 that needed to be dealt with. But the eventual consent decree that we had has 22,000.
That's all, 22,000, huh?
Yeah, so that number's a little bit higher.
Did that meet the number that you actually requested?
So the 22,000 was what we ended up agreeing in the consent decree.
Right.
Yeah.
Because I'm guessing that from the 4,000, they thought that you must have gone quite a bit higher before you came back down to 22.
Right, and I wasn't like intimately involved in those legal negotiations as a plaintiff in it, but yeah.
Right, yeah.
But 22 is, obviously a big difference. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then let's see here. So a couple more legal things to touch on. Unfortunately, a lot of the existing curb ramps were out of compliance with the regulations when they altered them last as well. So that was a problem. And a lot of the past surveys indicated that when they tried to fix them before, they didn't do it right.
Yeah.
And so an important thing with this consent decree is making sure that going forward, they would be doing it correctly.
Right. So anything new, they'd fix what they did wrong, plus add more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
So-
prior to this litigation, they didn't really have a plan in place for how to do that. And then also maintaining them, because they do wear out over time.
Yeah. Just like everything does.
Yeah, and so, like I said, I was the named plaintiff in that class action lawsuit.
How did you end up in that position? Like, what made it
Yeah.
so that you said, sure, put my name on that one?
Right. So it was right after I graduated from law school, actually, that I did this. And I had been involved with Disability Rights Washington as an intern previously. And I did it once as like a pre-law intern and then once as a legal intern. And so they told me that they were working on this important issue with curb ramps. And then I told them, I deal with that all the time. How can I help? And really just one thing led to another. They had me kind of go through and document which ones I deal with in my daily life. And then, yeah, just got involved in the litigation from there, and then it got filed.
Yeah. So from the start of that, when you finally said, sure, you can put my name on this, to the point at which
Yeah.
it was settled, how long did that process take?
Yeah, so the press release that came out, that's kind of the marker I go by, was July 17, 2017. And I graduated in late summer of 2014. So it was a 3-year process.
So I hear this is a theme that you're going to be hearing a lot today, is patience is an important part
Yes.
of advocacy.
Yeah, the long game is important for sure.
Yeah. So as somebody who was actually interested in the law, had obviously interned with this group, did that make you even more willing to kind of dive into this? Obviously, you now have a firm that's totally focused on
Yeah.
disability rights.
Yeah, and I think that was actually really helpful prerequisite for being able to do that. Because I worked with Disability Rights Washington, and then they had 2 other preeminent disability rights firms that were working with them on that case as well. And so that kind of opened the door for me to get connected in that broader world.
That's great. So I'm going to move on, but we'll come back because
Yeah.
I have more questions in the future. So Bruce, yours was kind of this next level. So we go from curb cuts to a Washington state issue. So can you talk a little bit tell about yourself first, and then how you got involved, how this became the issue that you advocated for?
Right. Well, I'm Bruce Hansen, and I suffered a C6 spinal cord injury in a skiing accident in 2001. And as I was recovering, I got into this. Well, the first step was I was looking for something to do because I was getting well enough that I had some time, but I didn't have much to do. So I worked on the campaign of a woman who was running for the state legislature in my district. Her name is Judy Cliburn. And so made phone calls and did that sort of thing. And then I also got involved with an organization, national organization called Quest for the Cure, through the CareCure website, which Wise Young, it's still around. It seemed to be bigger back then than it is now, but it was, there were a lot of people there and a lot of people who were doing activism. And so when Judy got into the legislature, I asked her if she would be interested in working on a bill in Washington. And so she said, yeah. And we did. We introduced a bill in the 2003 legislature to take a portion, a surcharge of the fines on traffic tickets to be applied towards spinal cord injury research. And this was the model that Quest for the Cure was using, and some states were very successful. I think Kentucky is the one that's maybe most successful. Susan Harkema and Andrea Behrman and the people there who are doing research in E-stem of the spinal cord were, that was funded from that, but that has been going for a long time. Here in Washington, that first bill was not successful, and for a number of reasons. One is I had no idea what it really took to do this sort of thing, and that model for funding was probably not the right thing for the state of Washington, because every little jurisdiction needs to get their cut, and by the time all that happens, there's not much left. And the administration of all that is also a problem. So we spent the next few years brainstorming about various ideas, and nothing really got off the ground. And then 2008, the economy tanked and things were tough. So it was a while before we got back. But in 2016, my wife, Kate, and I got together with Judy again. And a few things had changed with Judy in particular and our relationship. One is that Judy was the chair of the House Transportation Committee, so she was a very powerful person in the legislature. And she also is my son-in-law's aunt, which my daughter married her nephew in that time. So we had this family connection too. And so we sat down with her and talked about things and asked, would you be willing to work on this for us? And she said, I would be delighted to. I would love to do this. I've done what I want to do with transportation. I have time, and I would love to do this. So it turned out to be, after all that time, it turned out to be easier than we expected. But we ended up getting through a budget proviso, which is basically a line item in the state budget for the University of Washington, $400,000 a year for 2 years to be dedicated for spinal cord injury research in the state of Washington. And we formed a committee of 4 people with spinal cord injuries and 4 scientists to review research proposals. And through that review process, we awarded that money to 5 projects. And so that was really exciting. Some of those things, especially I think the work that Dr. Chet Moritz has done has really been outstanding. Working with electrical stimulation of the spinal cord on the upper extremities, which most of the people that have been working with it up until he did have been working on lower extremity work. So that, and the results he's gotten, many of you in this room may know some about that, but the results have been really phenomenal. And also this money did help seed things. So now he's got research, that's going, and it's been easier. He's getting funding from the NIH for some of that and other places. So that has been a good thing. Now we did then a year ago, the last session, we attempted to get that funding renewed. Unfortunately, Representative Cliburn was no longer in the legislature. She was helping us from the sidelines, but to make a long story short, we did not get the funding renewed. So we are in the process of regrouping for 2021. Because it's a long, as people said, it's a long game. It takes time, it takes building relationships, and I know I'm still learning. I have, in the interim, I did do some national legislative advocacy as well, but you'll talk about more about that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So that's how I got into it. I think I kind of fell into it by accident, but it's important. I just want to mention, my wife, Kate Willette, is a writer. She wrote a book called Don't Call It a Miracle. And this now is about 5 years old. It was funded by the Christopher Reeve Foundation. And it has information about science and about what's happening and why, and what's working and what isn't, and why is it working and not working. And in the last part of it also has a section on advocacy and how those of us who have spinal cord injuries and those of us who may have a friend or family member who has a spinal cord injury, there are things you can do. I've left some sheets about this on the back table. The book is free. You can order a copy from the Reeve Foundation. You can get an ebook copy from there. And she also is working right now on getting funding to do a second edition of this book, along with a series of focused podcasts on topics in the book, so we can hit people who like to read and people who like to listen.
Mm-hmm. That's great. All right, so Kenny, do you want to share your story?
Yeah.
And introduce yourself too.
Yeah, my name is Kenny Savini. I was also paralyzed in a snow skiing accident not long after Bruce. It was 2004. I got a C3-4 complete injury. I was about 8 months out of college and wound up a quadriplegic. And yeah, my story is kind of similar in the vein that I kind of literally got thrown into this situation when I was first hurt. I heard don't fly because the airlines are going to break your stuff. And so for the first 12 years, I completely avoided air travel just for fear of something like that happening. And then I got hooked up with United Spinal, which the forum here is hooked up with as well, to do just kind of teaming them up with my nonprofit, the Here and Now Project, that does social support on the local stage. And I was going to meet other advocates that were kind of working in their own communities, and decided to fly out to the East Coast. And I had my wheelchair pretty much destroyed for 11 of the 14 days I was on the East Coast. And then a year later, I was back in DC and had another chair destroyed on my way home. And so that kind of, I got to write an article for New Mobility magazine called Flying the Unfriendly Skies. And in it, I kind of talked about once is bad luck and twice is the universe revealing your path. And so it kind of had a way of thrusting me into this kind of national advocacy realm. And yeah, it was fascinating just because, I'd heard all the horror stories and I'd seen them firsthand myself, but then really kind of trying to dig kind of behind the curtain of the whole system and see what really caused this, and learning about the ADA laws and all of that stuff that come along with it, and then finding out that the airlines are not beholden to the ADA. There's actually a bill that came out 4 years prior to that called the Air Carrier Access Act. It was passed in '86, and they thought that covered airlines, and so the airplanes were just not included for the most part in the ADA. And so that's why we could flash forward 30 years and most of our domestic travel is not accessible for people using wheelchairs. Mm-hmm. And it was fascinating, to kind of really dig in behind the curtain and get under kind of the belly of the beast and find out all of the kind of ins and outs and the differences. Because, you know, when I was literally just going to meet more people in wheelchairs, I really had no frame of reference of what advocacy looked like. But yeah, then finding out that with the Air Carrier Access Act, it was only a Department of Transportation bill versus the ADA being a Department of Justice kind of civil rights bill. It was pretty fascinating to see how, you know, you get different silos of different jurisdictions of agencies and stuff like that, and to see, you know, where your power is and where kind of your, you know, your advocacy can fit into. Because it was pretty maddening to find out that, you know, when a wheelchair gets destroyed and they break your figurative legs, you've got no recourse to keep people accountable. And so, yeah, it kind of, like Bruce and Conrad were both saying, it's been a long game since, you know, getting to go to DC like 4 or 5 times now. And it's fascinating just because you get to spend time on the Hill and you're talking with legislators, but it really is this machine that moves at a glacial pace. There's so many different little intricate ins and outs that make it really difficult for you to kind of exact change. And especially being from a state that is heavily funded by a certain airline manufacturer, it makes things a little bit more difficult. And so, you know, between getting plugged in with the air travel stuff that we've also worked on, smaller bills, whether it's custom rehab technology as far as wheelchair cushions and different manual wheelchair parts and power wheelchair parts, it's fascinating to show up on Capitol Hill, and you're doing a lot of education for the legislators and their you know, their minions, I guess I would call them. But yeah, just really trying to educate people on, you know, our everyday lives and how these things affect us. And it's been, you know, it is definitely a slow process, as it took, I think it's taken 3 years for us to get some just basic wheelchair parts moved out of certain silos and into, you know, their own separate categories, so that Medicare and other insurance providers will pay for them. But it's been an interesting education that I was literally just trying to go to hang out with some friends, and then suddenly I find myself in the middle of the machine. And it was pretty fascinating, because the first trip when my chair got destroyed, I was live blogging kind of my experience, and I didn't really anticipate the following that it was going to garner with kind of the rest of the group that I was meeting in DC. And so by the time I arrived, everybody knew my story, and they were kind of all rallying behind me. And it was really cool to see in the last couple of years for them to kind of turn me into the poster boy of air travel for a little bit, and to have 100 different advocates from all over the country rolling on Capitol Hill and telling my story and using that as as leverage to try to create change has been an interesting process for me. So, yeah.
Conrad, I'd love to hear your take on some of this, like, you know, kind of one of being in the court to talk about, you know, a city ordinance and all of that, versus like getting legislative change on a budget and doing funding, and also like really thinking about, you know, gosh, I don't, you know, Department of Justice versus the transportation, and how does that all work, and kind of how does that fit into how you think about this process?
Sure. Well, I think probably I'd focus on what Kenny's been talking about, just because that's an issue that we and our clients deal with as well at my firm. It's just really preventing forward progress, not having a private right of action so that people can deal with things that happened to Kenny, for example. And unfortunately, right now, it's just left in the hands of the Department of Transportation. And so you file a complaint and hope they do something about it. Whereas what Kenny's really trying to do with this new legislation, among other things, is to make it a private right of action, so that you can file your own lawsuit and actually get some form of meaningful redress for what happened. And so I think that legislation could be really helpful and really open the door to air travel, which is way behind everything else when it comes to accessibility.
Yeah, it's a big, huge monster in a way. And I guess, I'd like each of you guys to talk about like that experience, because it is the patience game, clearly, but it seems like it's also a bit of a passion experience as well. And so Bruce, can you talk about like, this has been a very long game for you. Why do you stick with it? Why this, focus, and why this topic?
Well, I think part of it is that, I feel like it's just, it's a way for me to give back to the community of people with spinal cord injuries. And it is frustrating thinking about the whole thing and all that, but it's also, I have met over the years of doing it, I've met some really great people and connected with them, and so those relationships are really important. And I've also found that also the people in power, the legislators, their staff, and all that, they're people too. And so I've found that, I don't need to worry about approaching them or asking them to do something, because that is what their job is. And so I guess I feel fortunate that I am able to do a part in, making things maybe just a little bit better for all of us with spinal cord injuries.
Yeah. How about you, Kenny?
Yeah, I think I'd piggyback on them both. It's the opportunity to leverage some change, albeit in a small way. I'm a big documentary guy, and you get to see, the civil rights movements, and I always got kind of nostalgic seeing the change that's happened in the past, but then to find yourself kind of, neck deep in the same kind of struggle and the opportunity to serve. And yeah, for me, I stumbled into this story, and it gave me a lot of leverage, and it gave me kind of an avenue to use it to a larger benefit. But it's, because it is a huge machine that moves at a glacial pace, and it's, but it's an opportunity to push it in that right direction. It's that Martin Luther King quote of the path of moral history is a long arc, but it bends towards justice. And it's the opportunity to push things in that direction just a little bit more. And it's, like Bruce said, it's infectious when you get around people that, especially for me on the national stage, I get to see a lot of people that are working in their backyards to make some sort of change happen and to help other people. And it's, because I wouldn't be here without a bunch of other people fighting for the rights that I had to, have a chair like this and have the opportunity to have a voice. And so it's, it's just kind of an opportunity to give back, but then to see just a little bit, where you'll get that glimpse of things. It's like, okay, it's starting to shift, even in a small way.
Mm-hmm. So Conrad, talk about your experience, because it's a little different, because this
Sure.
is kind of your mix of your job and your passion.
Yeah, and I think this could not have happened at a better time, me coming right out of law school and kind of from day one focusing me on these issues and being able to make a difference on the ground in people's daily lives. And, it was exciting to see that I could make a tangible impact like this. And as a result of the settlement, 22,500 curbs. Over 18 years, 1,250 every year. And you can actually see the change in your community. So for me, it's really personal passion project, and being able to tangibly see the work we're doing is just really exciting, I think.
So for you, I mean, now you're on to other stuff
Yeah.
and other cases, because that one's kind of done. Do you look for your next passion project, or are you looking now to support other people's passion projects?
Well, I'd say it's a mix of both, and I see this really as an opportunity to empower other people with disabilities to realize that, teaming up with us, they have a chance to make these same kind of changes in their communities. Mm-hmm. And so I think really helping empower people and make them realize that they have legal rights and there's a way to enforce them. And so I think that's really important, and dealing with the things that matter to people in their communities and really what's going to impact the most people. And so, for example, right now we have a case against the Seattle Mariners because thousands of people with disabilities go to games and want to have an equal experience. And so we're dealing with that right now so that people with disabilities can have the same choice of admission prices, have the same choices for seating, and actually be able to see the field when people stand up. Basic things that I don't think we should have to be dealing with these days, but since we are, we need to fix them.
Yeah, that's a very powerful thing to be able to, and I'm sure you felt that way too, Bruce, when you guys got that funding through. It's like all of this effort and to finally actually see it come true, it's like a bit of a boost. But I think, Kenny, too, that like being able to share stories, and Bruce, I think you talked about this too, and certainly Conrad of being the plaintiff, I think that personal experience, personal story really drives a lot of this. It's one thing to get into the nuts and bolts of the legislation and the which committee and all those kind of things. You've learned all kinds of things you never knew. But you know, I think that's one of those important pieces of kind of what matters to each of us. Right. I'm curious for you guys to talk about kind of where, you know, Conrad's talking about his next step. Do you guys have, I mean, Bruce, you mentioned that you have this kind of just thought or plan to move forward to the 2021 budget and putting it out again. So kind of what is the work that you're doing towards that effort?
Well, we're at this point in a sort of a planning phase of holding. I mean, the legislature is still in session. This is a non-budget year, so we decided to, you know, not focus on doing a lot, but we will be working to find. We've identified some legislators that we think are going to be, well, that are open to the kinds of things we're talking about. They're open to helping us. And we've identified also some constituents, some people who live in their districts who also are willing to help. And that is really important. If you're a constituent of a legislator, that speaks much louder than just somebody saying, hey, you know, just knocking on their door, hey, I'm so-and-so, but, you know, I'm not going to be able to vote for you, shall we say. But one thing I've learned in time with him is that the legislators really like hearing our stories and hearing why we're here, why we're doing this work, what's happened to us, and because a lot of times they see, the people they see are, professional lobbyists and other things. So when we come and talk about, our personal stories or about ourselves or about our family members, that means a lot. And, talking about, going down there and talking with these people about, like, seeing somebody, like one of the subjects in Chet's lab, in being in the study, he found that he could play his guitar. And now that, was like, for him, life-changing. It was really, really a big deal. And so telling those kinds of stories, does make a difference and makes an impression. And so I've gone off away from your question just a little bit, but we are planning how we will be reaching out, both once the legislators are out of session and back home, we'll be inviting them to come and see, come and visit some of the labs here at the UW. Sometimes it seems pretty hard to get them, even when they're not in session, because they are busy people.
Right.
But we're hoping to, to build some relationships in the, throughout the rest of this year, so that when the 2021 session starts next January, we will, they'll know who we are, they'll know what we're looking at doing, and they'll know why, and they'll know that the results, and why this can be a good thing for the state of Washington to fund.
Yeah, you'll have your ask
Yeah.
all figured
Yeah.
out. Yeah, absolutely. So Kenny, for you, kind of where are things at with this for you, for your involvement in kind of changing airline travel in the future?
Yeah, it's been fascinating. When things first went sideways for me when my chair first was destroyed and when the second one happened, I thought that was going to be my moment, that suddenly I'm going to be the guy that takes down this huge juggernaut in the airline industry, and you get your ego pumped up with that, and you think that you're going to be the one thing that makes that change, but then you just kind of discover that you're one link in a chain kind of thing, and kind of finding the sweet spot for how to exercise that and when to utilize your story versus other people's story. And then just, I think, getting on the national stage, and you get next to all these other people that have similar experiences, but also different platforms. And so suddenly for me, I haven't been as steeped in the policy stuff as these guys have, and so it's kind of been opening up my eyes to all sorts of different issues. With United Spinal, they always have something in the works. Like this last year, we were talking about autonomous vehicles and how we can get on the ground floor of that legislation. And so there's always something there. But just kind of getting this initial foundation of advocacy work under my belt, it has kind of opened up my eyes to the struggles of a lot more people in different situations and people with different platforms. It's got me looking at all other disability rights movements and all that stuff. And so it's kind of it's fascinating, especially having the local advocacy stuff, that everything is going on here, but then also on the national stage, it does get a little bit tough to juggle sometimes.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and I think, one of the things that you guys have mentioned already, and we could talk about some of the other organizations, but there are several organizations in both locally and nationally, like the Washington Disability Rights Washington, which has several kind of sub-organizations like Rooted in Rights involved with them. You've mentioned United Spinal. I think Quest for the Cure, is that now United to Fight Paralysis, or is it?
No, it's yeah.
Different organization.
Different organization, but yeah, the U2FP, or Unite to Fight Paralysis, is the organization that puts on an annual conference called Working to Walk. That the primary purpose is to connect scientists working in spinal cord injury research with people in chairs and their families.
Right.
And also to develop advocates to advocate for the,
Kind of continue the research, right?
yeah,
To continue.
especially, mostly funding at the state level.
Right.
So there are other states that are also successfully getting money for
Right.
SCI research.
What are some of the other organizations that you have worked with or heard of that are local that are looking for advocates? I know we put together a bit of a list, but are there other ones that you just come up? And Conrad, do you have others that you typically work with or that you are connected with?
Yeah, it's a mix. It depends on the issues that we're dealing with. Disability Rights Washington, we work with the most, though. And Rooted in Rights, which is kind of their media arm, definitely. Some people have different opinions on them, but there is an ADAPT chapter out here, for example. There's the Alliance for People with Disabilities. There's the Governor's Committee on Disability Issues and Employment. And then there's also, for example, the Seattle Commission of People with Disabilities. So it's a pretty wide range.
Right. And some of those are just broad of any type of disability versus like United Spinal and UTFP that are more focused specifically on spinal cord injury. I think one of the things that I'm curious about is like, how do people even figure this out? Like, Bruce, if somebody wanted to join the cause for you and said, hey, I might know a legislator in my area, like, where do they find you, or how do they figure that out of how to connect?
Well, that's a good question, because we're not that well organized
Yeah.
yet, and so
So that more to come on that.
I would, yeah,
Yeah. Because I would imagine more people would be helpful for you.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And Kenny, like, if people were really excited about the airline travel idea and they wanted to figure out how to get involved, who should they talk to?
Yeah, that's a tough one too, because what I've found, especially in Washington State with our disability rights advocacy work, is we end up in silos where everybody is fighting for a specific cause, and it's kind of a fascinating, almost a divide and conquer, where we're almost getting in each other's way for the most part, and we're just now seeing, I think, some of these organizations kind of coming together and kind of building a larger coalition. But yeah, whether it's through United Spinal, they've got a really good, strong advocacy arm on the national stage. They're a good one to go through. Yeah.
Yeah. What do you recommend, Conrad?
Or one other one I'd mention too is AAPD, the American Association of People with Disabilities. I'm a little biased because I was an intern with them in 2007, but I'd say, yeah, just getting informed, getting involved, and really thinking about what's your particular passion or interest within disability rights. And then from there, volunteer, working part-time, internships. Just kind of get your foot in the door and figure out who the key players are.
Right.
Or for a lot of folks we deal with, some of our clients find that, working with us is their avenue to make change as well.
I think this is one of those dilemmas, right, Kenny? Because I think that, at some level, there's lots of things to get passionate about.
Right.
We're not to a point where things are good. Accessibility continues to be an issue. Funding continues to be an issue. Wheelchairs and, insurance funding, things like that continue to be an issue. And so I think, I'm curious about just that idea of passion and that idea of kind of how do you figure out when to go to kind of, well, I have all these things and where do I pick something that maybe enough people can combine versus like, this is really meaningful to me in my backyard and I'm going to pursue a lawsuit about it. So I don't know how each of you, I'm going to ask all of you to respond to that of like, how do you think about like giving advice to people or giving recommendations about how to think about either joining in as part of the group versus kind of tackling it on your own or some in between. So Conrad, do you want to start?
Sure, and I think I'd encourage people, even if the structure doesn't exist, if they're feeling ambitious enough, they can even start their own path as well. And I'm always pitching more entrepreneurship. Because for me, it was really, I guess, being in the right time at the right place and realizing that pretty much no one is working on accessibility in Washington. And that there's a near endless stream of cases, and if you get up to speed and become a good litigator, sky's the limit with that. And so that's just one example of many that you can pursue. And it wasn't something that I had to force. It just kind of opened in front of me. And so I think you'll kind of know when it's the natural right fit for you. If you're really getting out there, talking to people and looking, it'll become pretty clear what interests you the most.
So you recommend law school and and everything in between. Kenny, how about you?
Well, mine kind of started with a Google search. When I was trying to find the answer to why aren't wheelchairs allowed on planes? And then that led me to a handful of larger blogs and larger travel kind of organizations that were fighting for those kinds of changes. And then, for me, I just by blogging my story, got the attention of New Mobility magazine, and they approached me about writing an article and all that. But it can be intimidating, especially when you feel like the fly up against an elephant, which is how I felt with the airline industry. It's hard to know where to begin, but if you can find where the conversation is being had, whether it's online or in your backyard somewhere, for me it's about showing up, and that's always every connection I make has been crucial. So it's showing up to forums like these. It's showing up to all the places where people in your situation are, to see what that conversation is and who the next person is you're supposed to talk to start opening those doors. So.
Yeah, and I think that tackling that elephant, isn't it all about one bite at a time?
It is, it is.
And then I would add also perseverance too. Once you find that thing you're passionate about, if it doesn't work out first, second, third try, that doesn't mean it isn't the right path.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, I mean, it took from 2004 when you started the first try for funding to 2017, right? And then it finally
pretty
came
much,
through.
yeah.
So, that's persistence and patience.
Or like in my case, for example, coming out of law school, I thought I'd be involved with disability rights from the policy and legislation perspective, and did everything I could to line up that path, and then got out of law school and not once but twice faced employment discrimination. And from that, then was led to this path.
Yeah.
Because I realized if this can happen to me, it can happen to anyone, and if they won't hire me, I have to hire myself. And so I think perseverance is really key, and if you know this is what you're passionate about, don't give up if it's difficult at the beginning.
Yeah, absolutely. Bruce, advice for others?
Well, I think just, to your question about, how people can get hooked up, one of the things that I've done over the years now is, been places where, like this, the SCI Forum, other places where there are other people with spinal cord injuries, and just networking, talking to people. Also, Kenny's Here Now project, I've met a bunch of people through there. I was on the board of Pushing Boundaries for 10 years, which is an exercise therapy facility in Redmond for people with paralysis. And just in various places, I meet people and talk to them one-on-one and find out, what they're interested in and what I'm interested in. And I think that's been it's been a very one person at a time, meet somebody somewhere and talk and that. So your question about what would I suggest to people who are interested, I would suggest, doing just that, to go out and meet people and find, because, all three of us found ourselves in our positions through a series of happy accidents, and it's the people we meet and the experiences we have that lead us. And so I know for some people it's harder to get out, but I think there are many ways. I've also, through online communities, found, and met a lot of people, both, starting with the CareCure website, but also through other social media platforms now and other. There's lots of resources, and so.
Yeah. It's kind of one person at a time, and you get more and more people together, and more people are forced to listen when you get more and more people together.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Any last things that I haven't asked you guys that you feel like we don't want to miss out on?
Now, I guess I'd piggyback on what Conrad was saying about perseverance, is just trying to stave off the cynicism, because it is really easy to get discouraged when you show up. And the first few times I was trying to talk with legislators, and they were telling me that same thing, where it's like, well, look what state you live in with the airline manufacturers and why they may not be supportive. And it would be easy to say, okay, then I might as well not show up. But the more you continue, putting leverage on the machine, it will start to change in that slow pace. And it's, like Bruce was saying, like if you just keep continuing to show up and be a part of any of the conversations, whether it's, ADA celebrations or any of that stuff, you start to meet people, and it just kind of builds up like a tidal wave. And suddenly, you'll find yourself in the middle of a movement before you know it. Really.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think ask yourself, what's your passion, rather than looking at what's been done previously.
Mm-hmm.
And if the path hasn't been blazed yet, you might be the one to blaze that new path.
Yeah, I like that idea. I mean, it's you can start something new, or you can join something that's already gone on. That it's really wide open if you want to start making some difference. It's really just a matter of making the choice to do that.
I think also one thing is that I've learned is to give myself the freedom to make mistakes and do things wrong and say things that maybe I regret saying, or taking what you were talking about, hearing somebody present a point of view that I would never have thought of that being an issue, or I never would, or thinking in my head, why do you think that is even an issue or whatever? Well, it may be a reality for them. And I can recall one time being at a hearing down in Olympia with some folks from the UW when there were some bills about stem cell research for the state of Washington. And that was a very hot button issue. And there were some people down there who were testifying, and they were saying some things. In fact, they talked about a person who I knew personally, and they were misrepresenting what that person said and all that, in public. And it was like, I was amazed and appalled and all. But also, I learned that there's going to be, I'm not going to be able to counter every argument. I'm not going to be able to know every possible thing. But I can make myself teachable, so that maybe not this time, but next time I'll at least know that issue. There may be, there'll be another one that, to stumble on. But I think overall I found that, being both passionate about my cause and sincere has helped a lot.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I'd love to open it up to questions if you guys are okay with that. Any questions for these guys? Chris? So the question was, what's the current status of the air carrier issue? Is there actually movement on that at this point?
Yeah, so they introduced an Amendments Act in, I think, 2017 that did not quite get pushed through, but there was an FAA Reauthorization Act that was passed that had a lot of the same provisions within it. And so what that is, basically that cleared some funding for crash testing for wheelchairs on board aircrafts, and it also, I think it created an advisory board within the DOT itself that one of my colleagues in United Spinal is a part of. And so they're looking at all sorts of different regulations, whether it's how the aisle chair gets used within kind of the bathrooms and onboard planes. And then, I think that they're supposed to be putting together a passenger's Bill of Rights of sorts. But as it stands right now, it's still, we haven't got it lumped in as a civil rights kind of thing yet. And so it's, still got a long ways to go.
So the question was about kind of the ADA checklist and the regulations. Like, is that a good place for people to at least refer back to of what should be happening in their communities and kind of to know what at least is required in their communities?
Yes, the perfect place to start if you're at all interested in the subject is ada.gov. And then the U.S. Access Board is also a really good resource. And both of those places have everything you could possibly want to know about the requirements.
So in follow-up to that, like if somebody finds an issue with accessibility, which I'm sure you deal with all the time, at what point does somebody actually seek a legal recourse for that? Like at what point do you kind of say, hey, can I force them to make this change?
Yeah, well, I think as soon as you see a problem and you're interested in fixing it, I know it's a shameless plug, but contact us. Because since we're a nonprofit, we really deal within whatever makes the most sense. And so we always contact places and give them an opportunity to fix it before it becomes any kind of litigation or anything like that. And so we try to take that approach from the beginning, and then only if litigation is necessary, we pursue that further.
Mm-hmm. So do you find that most places, or most of the cases that you take on, that a lot of them don't ever need to go to, to trial? Or do you feel like more of them do than not, that people don't really want to be compliant?
Unfortunately, more often than not, it does require us filing a lawsuit, but then they usually quickly settle it after that.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as going to trial, we've hundreds of cases, and we've only had 2 go to trial ever.
So that's impressive. But the Mariners went to trial.
Yes, because that involves millions of dollars that would be spent to fix the stadium. So usually the more money that's involved, the more likely they are to fight.
Yeah,
Yeah, they do.
exactly. Yeah. So the question is really at the state level or the national level, like, do you need numbers of senators or representatives, or do you need the right senators or representatives? I think is really the question, right? Like, is it just getting the right number of people on your side, or is it really just having the powerful people on your side?
Well, I guess in the things that I have done with the funding, and this recent funding, because it's a line item in the budget, it's probably less. I mean, there wasn't a bill or anything, so they weren't voting on it, but it's, a lot of these things, it's like horse trading, you do a favor for me, I'll do a favor for you, da 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 da. And so, the first time through, we had, one of the most powerful people on our side in the legislature, which, pretty much made it a shoo-in. Though it was tense while we were doing it, because it seemed like, well, she was saying, I was thinking, well, maybe we need to get some people in wheelchairs down there to, have a little, rally and have some fun and all that. And I thought that would have been pretty cool. And she said, well, let's just kind of keep it quiet, low key.
Don't tell anyone.
Yeah.
We'll just slip it in.
And that's, it was more that sort of thing. But now this time it's going to take some more, but it's, we won't be working with a bill. With a bill, then you really do need to have, you need to get, a majority of each house to vote for it. And so.
And I think that's the complicated part, right? It's like there's not one pathway that works for everything. It's like there's lots of different pathways that you can go through to get something like this, to have the difference be made eventually.
And I'd also add for legislative advocacy, it's important with a lot of bills to focus on the grassroots aspect of it and actually get there enough interest so that it gets a vote. Mm-hmm. Because a lot of these things, it's not even necessarily that it would get voted down. It's just that it doesn't even have enough interest to get voted on in the first place.
Mm-hmm. So it doesn't even make it to the level.
It needs to get out of committee. Like the first time that first bill, it was a bill and it died in committee.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And then once you get out of there, actually getting a floor vote
Yeah.
And so with some of these things, it's just having enough people contact enough of their representatives.
Right.
Right.
And it
So-
can even just be one person with each representative, but just someone kind of on the ground.
Right. So back in those, like making phone calls, making those connections, talking to people, sharing your
Yeah.
story.
Well, I could tell one other story about that. This is a national level because I was involved in, there were a bunch of us who were there was a bill called the Christopher and Dana Reeve Paralysis Act. 10, 12 years ago it was passed. But it was in Congress for a long time. And the year it passed, I was not there, but I thought, well, what can I do? And Patty Murray was signed on as a co-sponsor here from the state of Washington, but Maria Cantwell wasn't. So I sent out an email to everybody I knew saying, would you call Maria Cantwell's healthcare aide? This is his name and his number, and ask him to do this, and ask him. And a week after, and then the Working to Walk convention that I mentioned was in Washington, and they were lobbying there. And so that's when I asked people to call. And a week later, Maria Cantwell signed on as a co-sponsor. So it was, one little thing. So
Yeah. And what did that? Can you remind us what
that
was?
bill, there were 4 parts to it that included some research, some quality of life, I think some grants. I think the Neural Recovery Network that now was formed out of that, and then there was one other part, but it was a broad funding across many areas of spinal cord injury, both care and more cure oriented. And I forget how much actual money was involved, but quite a bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, though, about utilizing your networks and never underestimating the power of force multipliers as well. And really networking with and getting to know the people that know lots of people. And so rather than you having to contact each person one by one, focus at the top and focus on people that can spread through their networks as well. And then you'll be surprised how many people you reach.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because if you ask a friend and they ask a friend, and yeah, you can extend it pretty quickly and pretty broadly.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So more of the specifics about, so in the 1,200 per year that is happening of curb cuts, how does one find out if their area or their area of concern is under the on the list for any given year, and how do you know if it's done right?
Well, there is a handy online form that's part of the Seattle government website. And so if you Google just Seattle curb ramp, I think, request form, it should take you if you just Google it. What specifically are the concerns in your neighborhood? Yeah, so there's an online form that part of this consent decree they're required to set up online. And so you should be able to report on there, and then they're required to get back to you and let you know the status of that, whether it's on the list or needs to be added. And then they're supposed to respond to those and deal with them within a year if it's a problem.
So you got a year, but at least.
But they have to respond within a couple weeks.
Right.
Yeah.
It may take a year
Yeah.
to fix it, but you.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you can at least find out about it. That's great. Good resource. And just if people are interested in Chet's Moritz's research and the story of the person who got back the ability to play guitar, those are both on a podcast, on the SEI Forum podcast. So there's a discussion with Chet and a discussion with John. So if people are interested, they can check those out. So
And if
don't know
I
you've
send
heard
you the
those.
link, can you post something about that curb request form?
Yeah, we could definitely
Okay, great.
include that. Absolutely. That'd be great.
Perfect.
Yeah, and I think, two things in addition. So one is that we do have flyers tonight if people want to take them about some of these organizations and links to them. We're also going to, secondly, we're going to put that up on the website as well. So if there's other things that you think of, the link for Kate's book is on there, but also some of the other organizations. But if you come up with other stuff, let us know. Because I think it's always useful for people to have a place to start.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, again, this is great for tonight, but also available to people beyond this as well. So really appreciate your time.